The eviction notice hit the old wooden porch before the widow even opened her front door. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes," the HOA president shouted loudly enough for the entire street to hear. "You have 72 hours to vacate this property. If you refuse, our attorneys will move forward immediately." The neighborhood froze. Children stopped riding their bicycles. Neighbors slowly stepped onto their porches, whispering to one another as they watched the confrontation unfold. Eleanor Hayes, a 72-year-old widow dressed in a simple blue cardigan, slowly opened the front door. She had lived in this house for nearly 40 years. Every brick, every flower, and every tree carried memories of the life she had built with her late husband, Thomas. She looked down at the envelope lying on her porch. Across the front were the words, "Final eviction notice." For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she looked directly at the man standing at the end of her walkway, HOA President Victor Langley. His expensive suit, polished shoes, and confident smile made it clear he believed he had already won. Victor folded his arms. "You've ignored HOA rules long enough, Mrs. Hayes. This community has standards, and you no longer belong here." The silence across the street became almost unbearable. Eleanor finally spoke. "You think you can take my home?" Victor smirked. "We're not thinking about it. We're doing it." A few neighbors lowered their heads. Others secretly recorded the confrontation on their phones, sensing something wasn't right. Eleanor carefully picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside were pages of alleged HOA violations: unauthorized landscaping, improper exterior appearance, failure to comply with board directives, accumulated fines, and finally, mandatory eviction proceedings. She slowly looked back at Victor. "I've lived here longer than this HOA has existed." Victor took a step closer. "That doesn't matter anymore. The board voted unanimously. Either you leave voluntarily, or we'll remove you through the courts." Board member Sharon Mills stood beside him with a clipboard. "You've had plenty of opportunities to cooperate." Eleanor's voice remained calm. "My husband planted these roses 38 years ago. They were here before your HOA." Victor shrugged without a hint of sympathy. "Then they should have been removed years ago." Several neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone knew those roses had become a symbol of the neighborhood. Yet no one spoke. Victor noticed the silence and raised his voice even louder. "Let this be a lesson to everyone. No homeowner is above HOA authority." His words echoed through the quiet street. Eleanor stood motionless. Her eyes briefly drifted toward the old oak tree in the front yard, the tree Thomas had planted the year they bought the house. For just a moment, a faint smile crossed her face. Victor misunderstood it completely. "You still think this is a joke?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. "No, I was just remembering something my husband used to say." Victor rolled his eyes. "I don't care what your husband used to say." Eleanor carefully folded the eviction notice and looked directly into Victor's eyes. "He always said, never underestimate the value of what you already own." Victor laughed. "I think you've forgotten exactly who owns this neighborhood." Without another word, he turned around and walked back toward his SUV. The board members followed behind him. As the vehicles disappeared around the corner, the neighbors slowly returned to their homes, convinced they had just witnessed the end of Eleanor Hayes' fight. They were wrong. Inside her quiet house, Eleanor walked down the hallway to Thomas's old study. She unlocked a wooden cabinet that hadn't been opened since the day he died. Inside sat dozens of dusty folders filled with maps, surveys, legal files, and property records dating back more than 40 years. She placed the eviction notice on the desk. Then she reached for a thick brown folder labeled in Thomas's handwriting. Maple Ridge Land Records. She opened it. Within seconds, her entire expression changed, because hidden inside those aging documents was a truth that would soon destroy everything Victor Langley thought he controlled. Eleanor carefully opened the thick
we have
brown
to address
folder.
this discrepancy
Inside
now.
were dozens of aging documents, faded survey maps, handwritten notes,
My
and
clients have
official
held this
county
deed
records.
since 1982.
Thomas had
This
always
survey
been
confirms the
meticulous,
boundary here.
keeping every important paper
However, the
neatly
county
organized.
records show this.
She took a deep breath and began reading. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one document caught her attention. It was an original property survey dated more than 40 years earlier, years before Maple Ridge Estates had even been built. Eleanor frowned. She pulled out another document, then another. The maps matched perfectly. Highlighted in red were several large parcels surrounding the neighborhood, including the greenbelt, retention pond, wooded walking trail, and vacant land bordering the subdivision. Her heart began to race. Just then, her phone rang. It was Daniel Mercer, the attorney who had handled Thomas's estate after his passing. "Daniel," Eleanor said, "I think I found something Thomas wanted me to keep." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied. Daniel arrived, carrying a leather briefcase. As he spread the documents across the dining room table, his expression slowly changed from curiosity
problem area.
to disbelief.
We have to address this
He
discrepancy
compared
now.
survey
Look at this
maps
survey.
with
The
county
access road is
filings
clearly
on his
marked
laptop.
over here. We
Then
must
he looked
challenge
directly
this.
at Eleanor.
My clients
"Have you
held
ever
this
reviewed
deed since
these after Thomas
1982.
passed away?"
This survey confirms
She
the
shook her
boundary
head.
here.
"I trusted that everything
However, the
important
county
had already
records
been
show this-
handled." Daniel slowly removed his glasses. "Eleanor, I don't think Victor Langley has any idea what he's done." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel pointed to the survey map. When this community was developed, Thomas didn't sell all of his land. He sold enough for the homes, but he legally retained ownership of nearly half the surrounding property. Eleanor blinked. "That isn't possible." Daniel handed her another document. "It is, and according to Thomas's will, every one of these parcels transferred directly to you." Silence filled the room. Eleanor looked from one map to another. Nearly half the land connected to Maple Ridge Estates belonged to her. Meanwhile, across town, Victor Langley sat confidently at the HOA clubhouse. He laughed as board members discussed Eleanor's upcoming court hearing. "She'll be gone within a month," Victor said. "We'll finally
This
have that
section right here is the
property
problem
under
area.
HOA
We have to address
control."
this discrepancy
Board
now.
member
Look at
Sharon
this survey.
smiled.
The access
The
road is
neighborhood
clearly
will
marked
finally
over here. We
understand
must
who's in
challenge
charge.
this.
Victor
My
leaned
clients have
back
held
in his
this
chair.
deed since
People like
1982.
Eleanor
This survey
always
confirms
give
the
up
boundary here.
eventually. None of the new
However,
accounting
the county
clerk had
records
just
show
received
this-
a request for certified copies of decades-old property deeds. None of them knew Daniel Mercer was already preparing a legal response. And none of them realized the very land their clubhouse stood beside wasn't owned by the HOA at all. The following morning, Daniel and Eleanor walked into the county recorder's office. An employee searched the archives before returning with several certified property records. She placed them on the counter. "Mrs. Hayes," she said politely, "these parcels remain registered in your name through your late husband's estate." Daniel smiled slightly. "Could you also certify the chain of ownership?" "Of course." Within minutes, they had everything they needed. Original deeds, recorded surveys, county certifications, estate transfers. Every document confirmed the same shocking truth. Victor Langley had threatened to evict one of the largest landowners in Maple Ridge Estates.
This section right here is
without
the
ever
problem
checking
area.
who
We have
actually
to address
owned the
this
land.
discrepancy now.
Daniel
Look at this
carefully
survey. The
closed the
access
file.
road is clearly
Victor
marked
thought
over
he
here.
was
We must
playing a
challenge this.
simple HOA
My clients
dispute.
have held this deed
He looked
since
at Eleanor.
1982.
He just
This
walked into one
survey
of the
confirms
biggest
boundary
legal
here.
mistakes of his life.
However,
Eleanor
the county
quietly
records show
nodded.
this.
For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. And across town, Victor Langley was unknowingly preparing for the board meeting that would soon become the beginning of his downfall. 2 nights later, every seat inside the Maple Ridge Estates clubhouse was filled. Word had spread quickly. The HOA president was expected to announce the next step in Eleanor Hayes' eviction, and dozens of homeowners wanted to witness it. Victor Langley stood confidently at the front of the room wearing a tailored navy suit. Beside him sat Sharon Mills and the rest of the HOA board. A thick stack of violation notices rested on the table. Victor adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight, the board will finalize enforcement action against homeowner Eleanor Hayes for repeated violations of HOA regulations." Several neighbors nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. The front doors suddenly opened. Every head in the room turned. Eleanor Hayes walked inside, calm as ever. Beside her was attorney Daniel Mercer, carrying a leather briefcase. Victor smirked. "I'm glad you finally decided to cooperate, Mrs. Hayes." Eleanor didn't answer. Daniel calmly placed the briefcase on the board's table. "We're not here to cooperate," he said. "We're here to correct the record." The room immediately fell silent. Victor crossed his arms. The record is perfectly clear. Daniel looked him straight in the eyes. No, Mr. Langley, it isn't. Victor laughed. Is this another delay tactic? Daniel slowly opened a briefcase. One by one, he placed certified county documents onto the table. Original property deeds, official survey maps, estate transfer records, certified ownership certificates. The smile on Victor's face began to fade. What exactly is this? He asked. Daniel slid the largest survey map toward him. I suggest you look carefully. Victor glanced down. His confidence disappeared almost instantly. Highlighted across the map were multiple parcels surrounding Maple Ridge Estates, the wooded trail, the western greenbelt, the retention pond, open land behind the clubhouse, several maintenance easements. The shaded parcels covered nearly half of the neighborhood's surrounding property. Victor looked back at Daniel. This has to be wrong. It isn't, Daniel replied. The county has certified every document. Sharon quickly grabbed another map. Her face turned pale. Victor, I think these are real. Board member Michael Trent leaned forward. Wait, are you saying Mrs. Hayes owns all of this? Daniel nodded. Not only does she own it, she has owned it for years. A wave of whispers spread across the clubhouse. Homeowners stared at one another in disbelief. Victor forced a nervous laugh. Ownership of nearby land doesn't change the HOA violations. Daniel didn't even blink. It changes everything. Victor frowned. Explain. Daniel picked up another document. You publicly threatened eviction. You imposed thousands of dollars in fines. You suspended services. And you represented to homeowners that the HOA had authority it may not legally possess. Victor interrupted. The HOA has governing authority. Daniel calmly replied. Authority over community rules, not ownership, and certainly not the authority to intimidate a property owner without verifying the facts. The room became completely silent. Daniel continued. Before sending Mrs. Hayes a final eviction notice, did you review the county ownership records? Victor hesitated. Our management company normally handles that. Daniel asked again. Did you personally verify the records? Victor didn't answer. Daniel turned toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is no. Murmurs filled the room. Several neighbors exchanged shocked looks. One homeowner stood. Victor, you never checked? Another spoke up. You told everyone Eleanor was violating HOA property. A third homeowner added. We all believed you. Victor's voice became defensive. This changes nothing. The violations still exist. Daniel opened another folder. Actually, it changes even more. He handed copies of several emails to every board member. What are these? Sharon asked. Daniel answered. Emails showing repeated requests from Mrs. Hayes asking for clarification about the alleged violations. Requests the board ignored. Another document appeared. Maintenance reports. Another. Photographs. Another. Certified inspection records. Every piece of evidence contradicted the HOA's claims. Michael slowly leaned back in his chair. Victor, did we build this entire case without proper evidence? Victor's forehead glistened with sweat. We acted in good faith. Daniel shook his head. Good faith requires investigation. You investigated nothing. At that exact moment, the clubhouse doors opened again. A man wearing a gray suit walked inside. He introduced himself. My name is Richard Collins. I'm legal counsel for the HOA's insurance carrier. The room fell silent once more. Richard looked directly at Victor. Mr. Langley, my office has reviewed the documents submitted this morning. He placed a letter on the board table. Effective immediately, I advise the HOA to suspend all enforcement actions against Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. Victor stood up. You can't tell this board what to do. Richard calmly replied. No, but if you continue after being informed of these ownership records, the insurance company may decline coverage for any damages resulting from your actions. The color drained from Victor's face. Even Sharon looked horrified. Michael quietly whispered, We're exposed. Daniel closed his briefcase. This was never about roses. It was about power, and power without accountability eventually destroys itself. Eleanor finally stepped forward. For the first time that evening, She addressed the room. I never wanted to embarrass anyone. I simply wanted to live peacefully in the home my husband and I built. She looked directly at Victor. You believe being a widow meant I wouldn't fight back. You were wrong. Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time since becoming HOA president, he realized he had completely lost control. And outside the clubhouse, several local reporters had just arrived after hearing rumors that the HOA board had attempted to evict one of the community's largest landowners. Victor looked through the window. Camera crews were setting up. His worst nightmare was only beginning. By sunrise the next morning, Maple Ridge Estates was no longer a quiet neighborhood. News vans lined the entrance. Residents gathered in small groups, replaying videos from the previous night's board meeting. Nearly everyone had seen Victor Langley confidently threaten Eleanor Hayes, only to watch certified county records expose the truth in front of the entire community. The story spread quickly. HOA tries to evict widow, discovers she owns half the land. Inside the HOA clubhouse, the atmosphere was nothing like the night before. Victor paced across the conference room while the rest of the board sat in complete silence. No one talks to the media, Victor ordered. If reporters ask questions, refer them to me. Sharon Mills looked up. I don't think the media is our biggest problem anymore. Victor stopped pacing. What does that mean? Without saying a word, Sharon slid an envelope across the table. It had arrived less than 10 minutes
earlier. When did you know about the scandal
Across
at
the
Maple
front
Ridge?
were the words.
Why are you running?
Legal notice.
The victims deserve
Victor
answers.
opened it. His
Get out
hands
of my way. I am
immediately
not
began to
answering
shake.
that.
Daniel Mercer had officially filed claims on Eleanor Hayes' behalf, alleging wrongful enforcement, abuse of HOA authority, negligence, interference with property rights, and reputational harm. Attached to the filing was a demand that the HOA preserve every email, meeting minute, security recording, and internal document related to Eleanor's case. Victor looked around the room. This is intimidation. Board member Michael Trent shook his head. No, this is called evidence. Just then, the HOA's attorney, Rebecca Lawson, walked into the room carrying another file. She didn't even sit down. I've reviewed everything. Victor stepped toward her. Tell them we're fine. Rebecca looked him directly in the eyes. No. The room fell silent. You have a serious problem. Victor's expression hardened.
When did you know about the scandal at Maple Ridge?
Rebecca placed several documents on the
answers.
table. You enforced them
way.
without verifying ownership. You threatened eviction. You approved escalating fines. You publicly embarrassed a homeowner. And according to these records, she paused. You ignored written requests asking for clarification before taking action. Victor tried to interrupt. Those were routine procedures. Rebecca shook her head. They won't look routine in court. Sharon quietly asked, what should we do? Rebecca answered without hesitation. Immediately withdraw every violation. Cancel every outstanding fine. Restore every suspended service. And begin negotiating before this becomes far more expensive. Victor slammed his fist onto the table. I'm not apologizing. Rebecca calmly closed her file. Then prepare to lose. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Mercer sat in Eleanor's living room reviewing another stack of documents.
Get out of my way.
County property maps, financial records, copies of HOA letters, photographs, video recordings captured by neighbors during Victor's confrontation. Daniel smiled slightly. The evidence is stronger than I expected. Eleanor looked concerned. I never wanted a courtroom battle. Daniel nodded. I know, but this case is bigger than your roses. It's about an HOA board believing it could ignore the law because no one would challenge them. Eleanor quietly looked out the window. Children were once again riding bicycles along the street. I just wanted peace. Daniel replied. Sometimes, the only way to protect peace is to confront people who abuse power. That afternoon, Victor stood outside the clubhouse, hoping to avoid reporters. Instead, microphones surrounded him within seconds. Mr. Langley, did your HOA try to evict a widow without checking county ownership records? Is it true she owns nearly half the surrounding land? Did the board abuse its authority? Victor forced a smile. The situation is being misunderstood. A reporter immediately held up a certified property map. Then why do county records list Eleanor Hayes as the owner? Victor froze. For several long seconds, he couldn't answer. The cameras captured everything. His silence, his nervous expression, the sweat forming on his forehead. Within hours, the interview was everywhere online. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. This time, homeowners filled every seat long before the meeting started. Unlike before, no one applauded when Victor entered. No one smiled. No one even greeted him. The whispers throughout the room weren't about Eleanor anymore. They were about Victor. As he reached the front table, a homeowner stood up.
When did you know about the
Before this
scandal at
meeting
Maple
starts,
Ridge? Why
I have
are
a
you
question.
running? The victims
Vito
deserve
side.
answers.
Go ahead.
Get out of my way.
The
I
homeowner
am
held
not
up a
answering
printed
that.
copy of the lawsuit. How much is this going to cost us? Another resident stood. Are our HOA fees going to pay for your mistakes? A third homeowner spoke even louder. Did you lie to this entire neighborhood? Victor tried to regain control. Please remain respectful. Michael Trent slowly stood from his chair. I think they deserve answers. The room became completely silent. Michael turned toward the homeowners. As a board member, I was never shown these county ownership records. Gasps echoed throughout the clubhouse. Sharon lowered her head. I wasn't either. Every eye turned toward Victor. He realized the very people who had stood beside him only days earlier were beginning to turn against him. And just as Victor reached for the microphone, the clubhouse doors opened. A county sheriff walked inside, carrying another envelope. Victor Langley? Victor swallowed hard. Yes, you've officially been served. The sheriff handed him the documents in front of every homeowner. The room was so quiet that no one could even hear the air conditioning. Victor looked down at the first page. His face lost every trace of confidence. The lawsuit had become official, and for the first time, he understood that this was no longer an HOA dispute. It was a legal battle he might not survive. The lawsuit changed everything. Within days, Maple Ridge Estates looked nothing like the quiet neighborhood it had once been. Homeowners no longer gathered to discuss landscaping or community events. They talked about depositions, legal fees, and one question that refused to go away. How had the HOA president tried to evict a widow without checking who owned the land? Victor Langley had stopped answering reporters' questions. His phone rang constantly. Most calls came from angry homeowners. Others came from attorneys. None brought good news. 3 weeks later, the county courthouse was filled long before the hearing began. Residents from Maple Ridge Estates occupied nearly every seat in the gallery. Reporters lined the back wall with cameras and notebooks. Victor entered through the side door with his attorney. The confidence he once carried had disappeared. Across the courtroom, Eleanor Hayes quietly took her seat beside Daniel Mercer. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She simply looked calm. The courtroom came to order as Judge Margaret Collins entered. After reviewing the filings, she looked toward the attorneys. Counsel, are both parties prepared to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel replied. Victor's attorney nodded. We are. Daniel Mercer stood first. Your Honor, this case is not about a disagreement over landscaping. It's about an HOA board that exceeded its authority. He walked toward the evidence table. They issued a final eviction notice. They imposed escalating fines. They suspended services. They publicly humiliated Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. And they did all of it without verifying the ownership records that had been publicly available for decades. Daniel handed certified county documents to the court clerk. These deeds clearly established that Mrs. Hayes inherited substantial ownership interests from her late husband. Judge Collins reviewed the documents carefully. She then looked toward Victor's attorney. Do you dispute the authenticity of these records? The attorney slowly stood. No, Your Honor. A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. Daniel wasn't finished. He played video footage recorded by several neighbors. The courtroom watched Victor standing on Eleanor's porch. You have 72 hours to leave. This neighborhood belongs to us now. We'll remove you through the courts. The video ended. Judge Collins looked directly at Victor. Mr. Langley, did you make these statements? Victor hesitated. Yes. Were you aware at that time that Mrs. Hayes owned significant portions of the surrounding property? No. Did you verify ownership before threatening eviction? Victor lowered his head. No. The courtroom became completely silent. Daniel called his final witness. Michael Trent, the former HOA board member, walked to the witness stand and took the oath. Daniel asked calmly, Mr. Trent, were county ownership records ever presented to the board before the eviction notice was approved? No. Were board members informed that Mrs. Hayes had repeatedly requested clarification regarding the alleged violations? No. Were you shown all of her written responses? Michael looked toward Victor before answering. No. Daniel paused. In your opinion, was the board given complete and accurate information before voting? Michael answered without hesitation. No. Victor closed his eyes. He knew the case was slipping away. After a brief recess, Judge Collins returned with a ruling. She looked around the courtroom before speaking. The authority granted to a homeowners association is not unlimited. It exists to serve the community, not to intimidate it. She turned toward Victor. The evidence presented shows a failure to conduct reasonable investigation before initiating serious enforcement action. The court further finds that Mrs. Eleanor Hayes suffered unnecessary financial and emotional harm. Victor remained silent. Judge Collins continued. The eviction notice is declared null and void. All fines imposed against Mrs. Hayes are permanently dismissed. The HOA is ordered to reimburse her legal expenses. The matter of additional civil damages will proceed under separate settlement discussions. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, but the judge wasn't finished. I also recommend that the association immediately review its governance procedures and leadership. She struck the gavel. This hearing is concluded. Outside the courthouse, dozens of reporters surrounded Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes, do you feel vindicated? She smiled gently. I never wanted revenge. I wanted fairness. Another reporter asked, what would you say to homeowners dealing with abusive HOAs? Eleanor looked into the cameras. No board should ever believe that power is more important than people. Rules matter, but respect matters more. Her words spread across local news stations before the evening ended. That same night, the Maple Ridge Estates clubhouse hosted one final emergency meeting. Every homeowner attended. Victor Langley walked to the front of the room without the confidence he once carried. He looked exhausted. Board member Sharon Mills stood. I move that Victor Langley be permanently removed as HOA president. Michael Trent immediately replied, I second the motion. The vote was called. One by one, hands filled the room. Nearly every homeowner voted in favor. The decision was unanimous. Victor quietly removed the president's nameplate from the table. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. The position he had fought so hard to control was gone. Without saying another word, he walked out of the clubhouse. No one followed him. No one stopped him. No one defended him. The following weekend, neighbors gathered outside Eleanor's home. Fresh flowers covered her porch. Children helped water Thomas's roses. Families who had once remained silent apologized for not speaking sooner. Eleanor accepted every apology with grace. She looked around the neighborhood she and Thomas had helped build decades earlier. Peace had finally returned, not because someone powerful had won, but because the truth had. As the evening sun settled over Maple Ridge Estates, Eleanor smiled at the blooming roses. Thomas had planted them years ago as a symbol of hope. Now, they stood as a reminder that no amount of arrogance, intimidation, or abuse of power could erase the truth. And in the end, the widow they tried to drive from her home became the woman who restored justice to the entire neighborhood.
Subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for new updates.